We're now joined by Andy Hutchins, of Alligator Army, who is right in the middle of the Byron Coward drama. What are you hearing? What are you seeing beyond Cowards? How do you feel about the class thus far that Jim McElwain has put together?
So briefly on Byron Coward, I honestly think that he's torn. And I think that this is a story that he might not have resolved until the end of the day. Obviously, everyone thought maybe 12 months ago, 6 months ago even, that Coward was going to be a Florida Gator.
Yep.
He comes from a high school program, Armwood, that has produced a lot of Florida Gators. He had a really good relationship with Will Muschamp. People thought that if Muschamp was going to be able to stay, that he was going to be able to make a really clean sweep of the 5 stars in Florida, Coward included. Obviously, that didn't happen. Muschamp's now at Auburn, and Coward's relationship with Muschamp goes with him. I think that relationship is probably the main reason that Coward picked Auburn earlier today. Playing time's going to be a thing for him, I think, too, but I honestly think that the comfort with Muschamp was the reason he picked Auburn. Now, does Sean Callahan, the coach, who is a Florida alum at Armwood, maybe get back in Byron's ear this morning and talk to him? Maybe you're thinking this through. I don't know. I don't think we're necessarily going to get a resolution until the end of the day.
All right.
I definitely believe that there's 2 national letters of intent signed. I just don't know which one's getting back.
All right. When you look at the rest of the class, obviously not an ideal situation with the head coach coming in so late in the recruiting process, but obviously Florida in on so many of the top kids later on in the process, win some, lose some. Jordan Scarlett, the recent running back commit, much coveted around the Southeast. Obviously a very nice piece, and Florida needed that running back. But when you look at the depth of the class, what are the names that you're most excited about in the short term?
Obviously, you've got to be excited about Martez Ivy just because he's so good. He might not necessarily be a guy who can play right away. I think Bud's already talked and written about how he maybe got to add some weight and get a little bit better. Worked in a veer running scheme in high school, not necessarily going to translate to the SEC immediately. But Scarlett's obviously a guy who could come in and play, maybe make some big plays right away. I think you could probably take somebody like Jabari Zuniga, who's a defensive lineman. You could plug him in because Florida needs pass rushers and doesn't really necessarily have one beyond Brian Cox Jr., because Dante Fowler going to the NFL is going to leave Florida sort of without that guy.
Right.
T.C. Jefferson, if he commits, could be sort of that guy too. But, playmakers, Scarlett's a guy that you could look at. Antonio Callaway, who committed earlier this morning, is a guy you could look at. It's just hard to figure out exactly where Florida's going to play some of these guys because, Florida's not really gotten a whole lot of production on offense the last few years. You may have noticed.
Yes.
So it's figuring out where these guys can make plays and then putting them on the field, really. That's going to be the difference for this class.
And your confidence level moving forward, Jim McElwain, head coach, and the staff he's put together. As for recruiting, obviously Florida takes a step back on the recruiting trail this past year with all that they were going through under Muschamp and his staff. Are you confident that McElwain, with his SEC experience and contacts within the Southeast, will once again bring Florida back to a threat to be a top 5 perennial recruiting team?
Yeah, I do. I think he's got a pretty good chance of that. And I think you have to look at his staff and say, okay, he's done a pretty good job of assembling a staff that's going to be competitive in the SEC. Jeff Collins, obviously, an SEC defensive coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
Randy Shannon, who's a beast in South Florida. Kirk Callahan, son of Sean Callahan, who was a guy who had a little bit of repute at UCF. The defensive staff has been really good, and McElwain's obviously a top-flight offensive mind. Bringing in Doug Nussmeier, who had an up-and-down tenure at Alabama as the offensive coordinator, but really did do a fair bit to help Alabama win national titles, gives them a brain trust on offense. I think not having a wide receivers coach, which Florida still doesn't, might have been an issue today.
Right.
Brian Davis obviously committing to Auburn, and then Javaris Davis just now committing to Auburn over Florida. But that's an issue that sort of gets resolved, and Florida's already got a commit for a really good 2016 wide receiver. So that's something that, as soon as you install a wide receivers coach, the worries about whether a wide receivers coach not being there being a problem disappear.
All right. Yep. Andy Hutchins, Alligator Army. Thank you very much for your time. And I think the Byron Coward thing is going to be real weird. I think it's going to get pretty strange.
Could be interesting down the stretch here. That's,
all right. I was just going to ask if you agreed, disagreed with what he was talking about with Florida. Obviously, you cover Florida State full-time, a big beneficiary of their struggles these past few years.
Both
on, both on and off the field. Are you confident in what Florida's done this season and what they're going to be able to do moving forward?
Yeah, I think Florida was smart here too, in that they reached for positions where they desperately need bodies.
Right.
But they didn't just do it just to fill out an entire class all over. And next year in 2016 in Florida, the state is pretty loaded. Florida State is probably not going to take a huge class next year. Florida does have a bunch of really good recruiters on their team. Jeff Collins, a very good recruiter at Mississippi State, did a lot of really nice things there in Starkville. I think Florida's going to be able to have a nice class next year, a really nice class. They took bodies in the offensive line where they needed to. Martez Ivy, the longest arms of anybody at the U.S. Army All-American game this year. He's 280-ish. He's never really passed pro'd, so you wonder if he has the instant impact. But long term, you got to really love that kid. He's extremely athletic.
And what will be important to watch, as Jim McElwain, obviously with his experience in more pro style and more pro spread stuff, is how he recruits. Not necessarily the 4 and 5 stars, but recruiting to the specific transitionary system that he will be installing in Gainesville. We saw the lessons learned when Gene Chizik decided to go pro style out of nowhere after Gus Malzahn left, and recruiting was all over the place. Lost Cam. And now Florida, with Will Muschamp trying to go more hurry-up spread last year, but they have more of a pro-style quarterback. So it's figuring out the recruits that best fit, not necessarily that are the most talented, period.
The big three in the state all run a pro-style now.
Yes, that is interesting. And especially because Florida does not themselves produce a number of top quarterback prospects.
Or tight ends.
Or tight ends. So something to pay attention to, but obviously big schools in Florida with Malik Henry next year, with what Miami's been able to do over the years, Brad Kaya. These are all California or West Coast products.
Jack Allison at Manatee.
Yes, absolutely.
Or down in Bradenton area.
Right.